Hey everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. This week we are getting back into more of Cold and Deadly, and we're going to be talking about the plot. We're going to be looking at some of the mystery and some of the romance, so lots to look forward to. But Dana, tell me what's happening at Danger Tales right now.
Listen, my caveat is always a reminder that we record these things so out of order and time is like non-existent. So at the time of this recording, we are in the middle of a boot camp, which is the first time that I've done this and has been absolutely insane. And so we finished week 1, and we have 3 more weeks to go. But it's been such an amazing eye-opening journey. So I call this first week, I call it like the green smoothie. So I think I've told you this analogy. So when my kids were younger, that's when I perfected my green smoothie skills, because that was a really great way to get in leafy greens under the radar. So, putting in spinach, you could put in kale, and they didn't really know if you put in some good frozen bananas, y'all, that is the catch, or a date and some fresh berries or whatever. So this week was all about giving them the green smoothie. It's where you giving them what they need, even though they feel like it's not what they want. And we just talked all about brand and the brand decisions that you make, how that determines the lens and scope for everything else. And so the student that was in the hot seat just did a phenomenal job and had everybody like on their toes. I kept telling them, she is showing out. She is showing out, baby. She came with her homework. She was ready.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Because she had been wrestling with this, and we kept going around in our private one-on-ones and also in our hot seats and inner circle. So when I picked her, I was like, this is going to be a good 2-week time to have some intense time of making some hard decisions. And as we did it, we uncovered so much, which I'll probably talk about in another one of our like what's going on type of talks, because I realized and uncovered, and we just sort of plugged out that she started having issues with reader expectations. And part of that stems from brand decisions. Right? A lot of times when people think you get books, I mean, you know this, you can get plot books like Save the Cat Writes a Novel, Romance in the Beat, James Bell Campbell, I always get his name mixed up, but James Bell Scott, I think it is. Like any of those types of structural books, Campbell, like you take your pick.
Yeah.
But that is really just the beginning. Right? Like your selection as a writer of what your readers are going to come to know you by, and your story promise and your brand promise becomes that final filter. And so if you don't understand what that is, it really can affect those reader expectations. Yeah. So that, and also uncovering how people's understanding and interpretation of tropes truly can throw you off, right? And so so having a time where I end up needing to teach about, it's what I call parallel tropes, where if you have a certain brand decision, having other tropes that are same or similar, so that every single story doesn't feel exactly the same.
Yeah.
Is a choice, right?
Yeah.
And so teaching them about how, for example, a big one that is a pet peeve of mine of like billionaire. And people roll their eyes when they hear, oh no, another billionaire romance. But I'm like, okay, but if you really look underneath, the question then becomes, why do readers love billionaire romances?
Yeah.
And on the surface, it's about the money. The reality is, on one hand, yeah, right? Because in romance, it's escapism reading. But the other part of it is like, what does money give you? Right? And what scope of that do you want to explore in your stories? Access, power, the ability to make things happen, you know, that can even trickle over into agency, can even trickle over into other tropes like protection, and so just being able to really talk about those nuances, but in a way where they were ready for it and they wanted to, because they realized like, oh wow, we're getting under the hood, and we're getting under the hood week 1.
Yeah.
So it was a very brain exhausting week.
Yeah.
And it's only going to continue. But I feel like the groundwork was substantial, and I think it's going to make this coming week even better. So yeah, I'm excited about it. So yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because you said, you know, this is sort of like the green smoothie. It's not exactly what people want, but it's what they need. What is it that people misunderstand about, you know, creating a brand, or what is it that like what is it that people are wanting to get to that you're sort of like having to reel them back and be like, no, like first we have to do this thing. Like, can you just tease that out just a little bit more?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, there's a million things, but I'm going to talk about two elements that I would say are probably the most prominent. We either want to get to the creative aspect of it as a writer, or we want to get to the money. Right? And the reality is, a lot of times people on the creative side think, oh, I'm so creative, you know, like whatever. I don't know if they sound like that, but you know, that you're just like, I just want to tell the story because I want to tell it. And you're doing it while not thinking of brand. You just want to be creative. You want it as a creative outlet. But then what happens is you want it as a creative outlet, and then you wonder why it's not selling. Right? Okay. The other side of it is, if you are someone that you say, I want to write and I want to tell a story, but I also want to be profitable and I want to be able to make this my full-time thing, then that means you really are considering, and on the money side, I would say market, right? And I think it gets a bad rap because people think writing to market. But the reality is, what you're doing is you're saying, I am not writing this story purely for my own satisfaction. I'm also writing the story because I want readers to read it and love it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? And so on that side, then your thing could be, I'm just picking the tropes because that's what people want. And we're not realizing that we can get the other side too.
Yeah.
We can get the love of the craft, and we can get the love of telling a story that we love writing, just by saying, okay, yes, they want this grumpy sunshine, but what are they really wanting when they want a grumpy sunshine? Because no one just says, I mean, now readers will say, oh, I just love grumpy sunshine, but it's not those words per se. I may not be explaining this well. It's what's under that, that you have this guarded man who in a lot of situations have been guarded, and this is the way that they protect their wounds. And you have a woman who has probably been kicked and knocked around by life, but that is determined to still be optimistic, and still, even though it is also a form of guard.
Yeah.
Right? And by the course of this story and this relationship and what we're going to uncover in the external thing that pulls us through the story, they have to come up against, well, why do I need to look at this? And there's got to be some way that they have to address that to be able to get the love that they really want. Now, it doesn't mean, like, I always, listen, I told my students that we've got to get another series other than knock them out. But for now, it is what it is. It doesn't mean that Knox is not still grumpy, right? That's just his demeanor. I think it's more so not grumpy anymore. He just don't have time for the bull.
Yeah.
And he's not going to dance around. He's not going to go around the block where he can go straight to it.
Yeah.
And now it's a different form of his expression. And so I think, to answer your question, I think sometimes people think of it as separate, but at Danger Tales, it's one and the same.
Yeah.
We want both. We want to be able to write the stories that we want to tell, and we want to be able to have readers that love it, and to be have a profitable publishing career. And so with that said, that means we've got to get under the hood and understand, here's what I'm promising my reader, because the thing that I will give for free is at the moment that you pin that brand and you understand that this is your brand promise and you begin to put that in every story, then that means readers can hop from book to book to book to book to book. Mm-hmm. So you may be promoting your new release, but if they say, oh my gosh, this is my jam, I like this, they're going to it's the likelihood that they'll go to another book or buy another book is highly probable. And if you're someone who is exclusively in Kindle Unlimited, or the bulk of your books are in Kindle Unlimited, they have no reason not to add it to their library. Yeah. It's already there for free, give or take. I'm air quoting free. Yeah. So to me, the greens in this, masking the nutrient-rich substance that we need to make ourselves nice and strong, get our papa on, is that you almost have to stop in order to speed up. Mm-hmm. You have to stop and make intentional choices. And even if the choice is air quote a wrong choice and that, okay, it doesn't land the way you want it to, at least we have a point to be able to reevaluate. Yeah. Because now we know this is what we did. This is how you wrote it. And then we can make adjustments. And so it becomes like almost like you not charging into battle, right? But you're like really creating a plan. And it makes for an even better experience in the coaching dynamic in which we're in as well, which is just gravy. Yes, my analogy are all over the place, but you got to roll with me. It's just gravy, because then I know what we're aiming for. Yeah. You know what we're aiming for. And then our conversations can almost solely be at the craft level. Yeah. And you've already done the layup for your marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's like, right, one of the things that I think you do really well is you address your approach addresses the misconception that it's one or the other, right? We get stuck in this false dichotomy of it's either I get to be a creative or I get to make money. But really at the heart of and now I'm using air quotes, making money side is really just being considerate of your reader, right? Just thinking of your reader as well. Not just you, not just what you want to do, but your reader as well. And you're combining those two things. And I'm always looking for, like, where are we saying either or when it's both and?
That's right.
Sometimes it is either, like, sometimes you have to make a choice and it does have to be either or, but it's really easy to fall into either or and mistakenly apply either or when it's both and.
Exactly. And I'm at the end of the day, I tell people, you're grown. You run your business the way you want to. If you want to do that, do you, boo. But if you come back to me saying, but is no one I can't say nothing to you. Yeah. You make that creative decision, you're going to thug that out. Yeah. So and sometimes it's like that. Yeah. And there were several people who was like, look, you told me. I did. But some lessons are best learned through hard knocks, and that's okay too. Yeah. But at the same time, if you are a person where I do have students where they have turned things around and they're starting to say, okay, wait a minute. I only did part of what she said. What would happen if I go ahead and do everything?
What would happen if I listened to all of the things she told me?
If I listen to my coach. And I also think like that the other side of this is the fact that you can really, really, really get what you want, which is you just want to tell good stories. You just want to sit in your writing cave and have a good old time, cackling to yourself like a hen, and, drinking Dr. Pepper and eat hot tamales and Twizzlers. You know what I'm saying? I'm just telling my business, That's what you want. And to be able to have that experience with readers. And so I think it's good. And having people that were in the boot camp that they experienced, even on the flip side of creating something really great, but because they didn't plan, they don't even know what they did. Yeah. They just did something. Yeah. And so we just had a really great time, great discussions, amazing questions. Some things will people frustrated because they're like, oh my gosh. But I think by the end of the week, we all could see clear of like, oh, because in the middle of it, it was like you're in the messy middle.
Yeah.
And having to be like, okay, is it okay if I ask you the hard questions here?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yes. And it's like,
yeah.
And you know, and I go in
discomfort before you get the gains and the breakthrough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Ooh. And I'm just like, I know, and it's like in my brain is get them. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like, because at the end they'll be better for it. They're more informed. I'm more informed. I would say maybe 75% of the people that are in the boot camp are already clients or in some capacity.
Yeah.
So it just helps us all the way around. Now I'll probably say 50, but in some capacity. And so it was just we spent a lot of time together last week.
Yeah.
And we got more to go. So yeah. What about you? What do you have going on over there?
So this is, it worked out really well the way that we do like the hosting and the ping ponging and the small talk, because I think that this is going to ease kind of right into some of our plot stuff, because, I sometimes you just like love the way that things like work, you know, I love it when a plan comes together.
Come on.
I picked that one up from you.
Okay. And I got it from A-Team.
From the
but we're gonna keep
yes.
it.
Yes. I remember one of the first things that you said. So when you and I met, we first started just emailing. Like we had met in person, and then we were both going through certification, and so then we reconnected and we emailed. And I just remember, like in an email, you wrote, "I love it when a plan comes together." In parentheses, that was the A-Team. You might have followed it with, "Are you too young for that?" Because you thought I was young when we met. Like
you are.
You thought that I was like fresh out of like college or high school or barely in like.
Not when we started emailing, but when I first met you, it was like one of them bless your heart. Like,
look at this little baby. I was probably like 27 or I think I was 27, and I was like, all right, well, I'm not that young. But I do tend to look on the younger side, especially when my hair is long. I feel like it makes me look, I don't know, it makes me look younger. So.
You look all the time. All the time.
So anyway, so I was talking with one of my clients, and we had been going through the things we never got over, because we have kind of this enemies to lever, slower burn. They're not like full enemies, but they're definitely not like, they're definitely butting heads in, all the way up until they get together, and even while they're together, it's kind of their thing. But we've been looking through the things we never got over and studying it together. And one of the things that she, came back to me with was like, okay, one of the things I'm like, one of the things that I don't want to emulate, we'll say, from Lucy Score is her language early on gets very sexual. Right. So, so when describing attraction, especially because actually like Knox and Naomi are really repelled by each other's personalities, it is kind of purely physical attractions. When in a lot of our descriptors, right, that we're getting. And like one of the things she was looking for is like, okay, but I don't want to just stay in the physical attractions. Like I want to expand that out to, appreciation for character or admiration or these kinds of things. And it worked out so well, though, because Cold and Deadly actually does that. Now, it doesn't stay there, but it slow burns the language as well. So I went back through the beginning and was kind of tracking how quickly we get to physical attraction. And we do get there early. I'm talking, within like the second chapter, we're getting to light, but it's less explicit than Lucy Score is what I mean, right? So we're noticing eyes, we're noticing jawlines, we're noticing musculature, we're getting stuff like that's warming us into there's physical attraction early. But in the beginning, we get the light introduction through some appreciation of character. So Dominic is recognizing that Ava is cool under pressure, and he's like, and so right immediately now this is a. And I think it's appropriate as well because our story setup, and we're going to talk about this, is at a funeral with an active shooter situation. So, like, probably now is the time to keep it in your pants because we have an active shooter situation and we're at a funeral, you know? So I can appreciate, you know, that there's, like, a level of, like, maybe this isn't the time. But it leads us in with, like, they work as a team. So we get that introduction to they work well together. And then it shifts into some mutual appreciation for, like, Dominic in particular. He's like, oh man, Ava was cool under pressure. But after the situation, the immediate danger has resolved, then we start to get some of that physical attraction. And so again, it starts early, but we do lead in with a little bit of, like, appreciation for competencies. And I thought that was a really interesting example to look at with my client of, like, how we shift into, we have some appreciation for Ava's abilities, and we also are quickly recognizing that she's very attractive, and she's quickly recognizing on the flip side that Dominic's very attractive, but it's also not as explicit as it is in Lucy's score, where we're very quickly, I looked at, you know, chapter 2, Knox's POV, he's looking at her body and says, wearing, you know, athletic clothes that promises more than a handful of good surprises or something like. So it's immediately more sensual.
Was it? Yeah, it starts in chapter 1 there. But I will say this. I think the flipping can be the sign of someone who's not a romance reader, because the reality is in life we don't go, oh my God, she's so smart, I think she's hot. No, that's not how it normally goes, right? There's usually some sort of physical attraction. And I think even in this story it was. Because when they were doing the hush whispering, okay, and we're going to get into it, but when they were doing the hush whispering over to the side, Dominic had already clocked that she was beautiful.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I'm getting at here is that we ease into sensual, like, more sexualized
definitely.
language. We take longer getting to that kind of language than we do in Lucy's score. And that's what she was looking for, is, like, maybe just not right off the bat, like,
and that can go back to, just like with me talking about with the boot camp, that goes back to trope selection. Because here, you're not going to go into the sensual. They are colleagues.
Yeah.
And he's a superior.
Yeah.
So no, you're not. You're going to be fighting it.
Yeah.
But the progression of intimacy is still essentially the same. But the language choice and the pacing is going to be tempered in a, which is called like a boss romance, right? You have a boss in a boss romance. Then if in the case of Things We Never Got Over, it's just a guy and a girl.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a guy and a girl. And so, yeah, definitely, yes.
So that was really, it's interesting to be doing this now, because I was reading this book while we were having that conversation. So it gave us just a point of comparison and contrast. To your point, right? We have, you know, they are colleagues, so we're not going to just let our thoughts go flying straight in a particular direction. And so it requires more restraint. And that's also part of the build, right? Because then you're, like, resisting the attraction, and that's part of that kind of, like, building that romantic tension. So having kind of like a flip side and a different way of, like, looking at that progression based on the context and based on the kind of story that we're in. And this one is a nice comment. We have crime and we have romance coming together. Crime-ish, mystery-ish, and a little bit of suspense. Did you say suspense or thriller is where you landed on?
Suspense. Yeah. I would say I totally agree. And I think it's also a great combination for people who, and I mean, we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, in our editor's takes, but we normally just have limited time. So I guess getting it out when you can helps. But it's also a great pick for people who don't want to rush in that into the physical intimacy, because it is more understandable for it to be a slow burn, especially in this scenario because of the stakes. The career stakes, and she was already butting up against that, which we'll talk a little bit about today. So I think absolutely. And so those selections and picks as a writer, you know, the profession, the core, the external here, which was essentially it's a murder mystery. And that's the core of that moves this whole train forward. It makes for the great sort of setup that she had to fold both the romance and the suspense and honestly mystery together. And I think it's really a great conversation that we could even touch on, and we should make note of for the editor's takes, because it's kind of that thing of like an old mentor of saying like all great masterworks have a little bit of everything, right? And this does have it. Like at certain points, the mystery is a lot more in our face, but what's moving this forward, I believe, is that suspense, and that suspense being tightly woven into the romance causes both of them to move us through the story, and the mystery is sort of what keeps us on the hook. Right, of like what's going on here. And there were some very specific choices that Toni Anderson made that I think really worked for this, and I think it worked for it in another scenario. I think this would have been a little too slow. But because of doing certain choices like POV and all of that, I think that just made it so that you just didn't get too relaxed as a reader. So it kept you engaged.
So I just, on that note, so I just want to look like high level. What are some of the topics that you want to cover today? And then I'll just kind of whatever, like I'll add in mine.
Okay. I'm doing quick.
It's on the agenda. It's on the agenda. She says this is how we're going to do it.
And I'll go super fast. Okay. I have the, I call this what we're talking about now, but like a dual hook. The fact that we have the high stakes murder and the slow burn romance that are sort of pulled together, which really gives us that romantic suspense. Something else that I want to talk about is really about how we have the case sort of unfolding along with her using those as opportunities to unfold the sort of fears and wounds that the main characters or protagonists need to address if they really want to move forward with their lives as well as their romantic relationship. I also really think it's part of plot, but it really is this undercurrent that I thought was strong that helped it to lean more towards romance than suspense, which was the emotional aspects. Because of her past and his past, and both of them sort of had the same sort of walls to scale that almost made those walls invisible, because they were wrestling with some of the same issues in different capacities. And I think that made this feel more than what your traditional suspense would be, because it's a lot more on the feely emotional side. And then the final thing was, I think it circles me back to one, but I think that it's really important and was one of the reasons why we selected this, the fact that the suspense aspect sort of turns into a thriller. And I think that's why people always couple them together, but that we have that along with the satisfying romance. And so since we're talking about plot, really thinking about how those things pace each other, and it really was very good up until the end. And I think this was one of the stories for me that shows me why people get those two so twisted. But as a writer, even if you have the presence of both, understanding what capacity you're in and where, so that you're making the appropriate decisions when you're on the page, even if your story includes all of it. Because this one includes the mystery thriller and the suspense. And if you were to ever go and like Amazon and look at a category, it's always lumped together. And this is one of those stories where a lump would work.
By the way, it just drives me nuts. Ugh.
But this is one of those stories where you see it. So you really have to decide what is going to be what I always call the forward-facing aspects of the story. And I think it is a romantic suspense. The other parts are just like Cool Whip, cherry, whatever on top. And I think she did a really great job of keeping it moving forward. And I think that's also what keeps us glued, because we really don't get fully complacent or relaxed. And I think that is done like a real hardcore suspense, even though we got the steamy bits. It's not over the top. It is on the page, and all of it is equally satisfying. So those are the elements that I kind of, glossing would love to be able to touch on for this particular book.
Awesome. Well, I've got a couple things that I just want to add in here. And I think that because we have a lot of overlap here, I do want to talk about those first couple chapters of the way that the story is framed, because of how it sets up our mystery, our romance, our suspense / thriller stuff. Like it's a great way to enter into the story and basically showcase all of the promises that of what the story is going to be. It's really, really well done. And then on the side, I also want to talk about some of the FBI procedural stuff that felt like, I think that ultimately she handled it well to make it all work together. But that I think almost felt like it was shifting off topic a little bit, where like we're driven, like the promise we're getting is chasing a killer and solving the mystery, and then we get this FBI stuff that doesn't really connect back to the case. Now it connects to some other stuff, and so that's why I think like ultimately I think she folded it in a way that it worked, but it meant that where we got a lot of promise up front about this case, it sort of shifted away to a different topic where it was more about, being in the FBI, that I wasn't, again, I think she ultimately made it work, but I wasn't crazy about it. Like, I think I would have probably counseled slightly differently. But again, I think she made it work, so I don't want to like come down too hard on it, but it felt a little bit almost like we were getting into some tangential stuff. So before we like dive into the conversation, can you hit us with that summary, Dana, of our plot for this story?
Sure. At its core, Cold and Deadly is a romantic suspense novel built on a high-stakes murder investigation that spirals into a hunt for a killer targeting FBI agents. The story begins when a rookie agent questions the official story behind her mentor's sudden death. Her refusal to accept it as a suicide pulls her into conflict with the Bureau and into an uneasy partnership with a seasoned FBI negotiator known for keeping his cool under pressure. When a sniper strikes during a funeral, it's clear something bigger is happening. What follows is a cross-country investigation filled with shifting alliances, buried secrets, and escalating danger. Every new clue raises the stakes, not only for the case, but for the two agents at the heart of it. Their relationship evolves slowly, tangled in grief, trust issues, and professional boundaries. As the case unfolds, the romance simmers beneath the surface, complicated by power dynamics, emotional baggage, and the question of whether either of them is ready to let someone in. The result is a story where the suspense drives the plot forward, but the emotional undercurrents give it its lasting impact. So that's roughly what we're playing with when it comes to Cold and Deadly by Toni Anderson. I was going to call her Stephanie. I don't know why.
I have a guess. I mean, it's not a solid guess, but it might have something to do with our next pick. that maybe you've got Stephanie's on the brain. But it's a secret. It's a surprise. I'm not going to say anything until we get to our takeaways episode, I think is usually when we do that.
Yes.
I'll have to check the agenda. Anyway. So, I think that probably starting with this sort of dual hook, and because I think the conversation of the dual hook that you were talking about and the sort of story setup in the first chapters that I kind of was talking about as well, those feel like a really great place to start about what this story is promising, how it's weaving in all of these kind of mishmash of different things, but weaving them together in a really sensible, a way that works really well. So talk to me a little bit about, this dual hook and how the high stakes murder and our slow burn romance are kind of interplaying with each other. And I'll just kind of let you take it away right there.
Okay. And I'm so glad that you talked about sort of the setup, and I have it down to talk about in the, like the editor's takes, because I agree. I totally agree. And so we'll talk about that story promise, first chapter, first act of this story in general, was just a great setup. So with that said, I feel like, the beginning of this story starts off at a funeral, right? And this is not a joke, okay? Like all hands on deck, okay?
Yeah.
And what I really loved about this is the fact that we start in the midst of something that is so emotional, but at the same time, it is action-packed, and it sets the cadence, and it sets the expectations for the story. So here you have something that's highly, as far as danger is concerned, because not only are we at a funeral, but another agent is sort of pulled into this, and at this point, it's for all, like, to put it mildly, is like it's not what it seems. But it also places us where the emotional aspect of it comes in for Ava, because for Ava, she never thought it was what everyone was making it out to be.
Yeah.
And this was just another opportunity to sort of drive that home. And it's almost like that juxtaposition between being professional and having a case that is so closely intertwined with what we learn, not just her professional career, but her life. Yeah. And I really feel like if we were to sit and sort of graph out the way that this story went down, like the way she did this was just masterful to me. And in that, it's almost like the first thing was the most important thing the entire time.
Yeah.
And it did make Ava seem irrational, hot-headed, and some of those things she was. But by the time you add the emotional stakes of it, it just made it even more off the rails. And so having that, that we had this sort of sniper situation, we were able to, this is something I find is so important, and I hope I say it right. I think sometimes when you have women who are professional women in a story, and at the same time experiencing something emotional, you really have to be careful, because on one hand, you want them to be likable, you want them to be competent, and you want people to be on board with them for this journey. And all of those things have to happen really quickly, because if we're not invested in her, we're not going to keep reading this story.
Yeah.
And at first, she could have been like, oh, Lord, here she comes, you know? And as it goes on, we realize why. But seeing her in her professional capacity, that wasn't like the rock in your shoe that you need to get out while you're walking, like that's irritating. And it was important to see that she was a good agent. She does know her stuff. And even though she's not always right in how she approaches things, and she doesn't have the best timing, it's coming from a good place. And so, and knowing that we bump heads immediately, and they bump heads, her and Dominic, at the same time, like it's just the setup for a perfect storm. And I think Toni took it a step further, where you see authors that really get this right, and one day, Lord, let me be one of them, which is everybody that needs to be on the page shows up first chapter.
Yeah.
Man, oh man. Everybody that needs to, that you need to have a tip to nod, even if we don't know how important they are, it's there. And so I think this is the setup. We get all of it. We get the romance or lack thereof, or the physical awareness, and the not just the physical awareness, but the awareness of the person in general that takes place. We have Van's funeral. We have the presence of the sniper, which is, and then we have the question as to whether Van committed suicide or not.
Yeah.
And we have all of it on the page, front and center, and we have all those aspects. Romance, suspense, murder, thriller, all on the page. And again, beautifully done.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I think she did really well, the way she crafted a setup to make the story essentially make sense, to make it work. So we, and everything we're talking about, guys, just Dana already said it. This is chapter 1, and
Chapter
then maybe
1.
a little bit into chapter 2. So you can't even call it a spoiler because it's like it's the first thing that we see in the story.
And you can read it in the sample and the look inside.
Yes.
So yes,
yeah,
go
exactly. But so because we open, we have a little blip from the antagonist's point of view to open the story, and then we're straight into the funeral. And what I think she did so well. So first of all, she gave us a reason why the FBI doesn't want to look further into the case, and why Ava has to investigate kind of off the books, right? Which is going to escalate the stakes for her, because right, what the FBI is pretty sure happened is that Van Stamos killed himself. But Van Stamos is Catholic, and that would, if that was the conclusion they officially drew, then he wouldn't be able to be buried with his wife. So the FBI, out of respect, because he's an FBI vet, they're sort of they're like, oh no, it was an accident, and they're trying to just kind of wrap it up quickly before anyone can ask any questions, because they're really trying to protect his reputation and let him be buried next to his wife. So rather than the FBI is presented as, it has its flaws, but this isn't a corruption thing happening. It's actually, they're kind of trying to do right by Van. But Ava, as someone who knows him personally, just feels like this is all wrong. So then, because this is a funeral for an FBI agent, Ava, who does often lack tact, we forgive her causing a little bit of a fuss at the funeral, because she is at the bottom of the FBI hierarchy. This is like her one shot, and even in one of the early chapters, right, she's like, this might be the only time I'm ever in the same room as the FBI director. This does not happen often for Ava, versus someone like Dominic, who is he's established, he's a veteran negotiator, which means he's like very, he's kind of important in the hierarchy. And so we, as much as we're like, oh, Ava, maybe now's not the time, we understand that this is her one shot because she has a personal investment. So we get to see that she's hot-headed and works on instinct, but also not to the point where we're like, God, this woman, right? Where we're just like, now she's just making a stink for no good reason, and then she becomes unsympathetic to us. So then so already Ava and Dominic are in the same room, or in the same quote room because the funeral's outdoors. But then by introducing the sniper, they are thrown together to start working together right away. So there's this immediate force that's pushing them together, and it's setting us up because we're going to see a whole lot more of that right in the story of them working together. So the circumstances bring our lovers into having to cooperate with one another. And I'm going to just take add one more thing. They have a very early intimate connection where Dominic notices something about the way Ava responds to physical touch. And there's an intimacy to it because it's sort of a vulnerable tell that she doesn't mean to give off. And it's now information that Dominic knows about her. And that shapes a part of how he understands, like he sees sort of past her guards very early on because of this interaction. So we have this powerhouse setup that's introducing pretty much everything we're going to need to know for the whole story and what we're going to get in this story. And, you know, she starts us with this kind of situation, and that's where the story starts. Like, this isn't our hero at the mercy of the villain scene. This is literally chapter 1. And so it gives us all of those setups so we know what to expect out of the story, and creates a scenario in the story that is reasonably believable as to what's happening. There's still some suspension of disbelief, but it's not like Ava's making like non-common sense decisions that's causing problems in the story, and we're like, what is even going on? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think one of the things about this too is I think some of the things that may seem I don't want to say irrational, but from left field, is also because she's sort of fighting multiple battles at once. And it's almost a thing of like, you know what, I'm going to pick my poison. I'm going to just go for it. In the end, whatever happens, happens. And I think it was a great setup for her to be in that capacity as a balance to Dominic's cool, calm, weighing every word, question, his negotiator aspect versus her being a rookie and coming off of being a cop, right? And so the way things work, and he keeps trying to tell her, you know, keeps trying to say subtly, man.
Gives her a little tug on her jacket, like, can you bring it down?
Look,
no.
Why are you pulling on my jacket? But yes, I totally agree. I think the other part about this, before we move on to the other one, is that this is a great setup of tropes. This is a great setup of tropes of the fact that you have in romance, you have the age gap, you have the boss employee, you have, and in this case they're not quite boss yet employee, but it's really close because of the hierarchy. You have almost a fish out of water, because even though she's been in the capacity and she's still a new agent and she's still trying to learn the ropes, her instincts are good, but her instincts need to be shaped. And it's interesting that you have that dynamic of Van as her mentor. You realize she's saying he's her mentor. He sort of has mentored her, we see, through life, without giving anything away. But at the same time, I think Dominic is schooling her in FBI, you know, and how you work these rooms.
Yeah.
And all the while, he's also knowing the ropes because he's intentionally trying to walk this very narrow path so that he does not bump into his natural circumstances, his father, his godfather, things that could just cause him to not be one of the guys in a room. And whenever that comes up, baby, he checks that with the quickness. So I think, you know, it's a very interesting dynamic, and and this is what makes it layered, because it's not just my mentor has died, the person who hired me or my boss has died. It comes with so many loaded aspects to it.
Yeah, and there's what happens too is like there's a personal connection for both of them to the case, which just adds to that motivating force and adds to a thing that bonds them, because Dominic was friends with Van, so he knows Van, he loved Van, and then Van took on this mentor role for Ava, and so it gives they're both grieving Van, and it gives them something in common, and it also early in the story, Dominic knows Ava because of Van, and knows that Van thought that Ava was a good agent, right? So has that sense of there's already a little bit of a draw through association of like, he said she was a good agent. He would want me to look out for her. Like, it sort of helps motivate him toward her, where otherwise he might be like, good luck. And there are some moments where there's this moment when she starts, she goes to talk to the FBI director and he tries to counsel her away from it. Yes, and he sort of is just like, he literally draws distance between them and it's like, I am not a part of this. I didn't, nope. Trying to like back out of it. And I think that this sets up what you were talking about. There's kind of, they kind of go together where we have the case unfolding alongside, like in ways that bump into the wounds and bump into the fears, which is what you want, right? You want that external stuff to be running the protagonist, your main characters, up against those wounds and those fears. And it also helps drive some of those emotional aspects of the story, right? Because it's deeply personal and it's forcing them to kind of confront some of those places where they're sitting on grief, where they've not processed things, where they, and it lends more of that emotional aspect, so that you don't have, because in a straight crime, and we talked about with this with the whistleblower, it's emotional, but but it's not deeply emotional the same way that a romance is, and so it never feels sterile, right? It's always very heartfelt while still action, romance, steam, like we're kind of got all of the things firing together.
Mm-hmm. I think well, part of that too is because romance really is about transformation, right, of the person. Going from where you are, which is usually stuck, whether you know you're stuck or not. I think part of this too, when you go from talking about that dual hook into that sort of those parallel arcs, is sort of the thing that we didn't say, which should be a little bit apparent, I think, in that their close proximity to him as having a personal relationship also makes it so why they shouldn't be on this case.
Yes.
Right? You are showing exactly why you need to give me 50 feet. You know what I'm saying? You showing me why. But they just can't, because it's like, but I owe it to you because of what you've done for me. Yeah. And you also see the almost like the way that they each navigate the world. The thing that sort of choked Dominic up is how he navigates the world because of his father. And the reason why Ava goes so hard for Vin is because of her lack of a relationship with her father and him becoming this sort of surrogate sort of situation. So I think that's what allows us to see the parallel, because at no time, even when they're at their utmost professional to ensure that this is done the right way, that the evidence is collected properly, where Dominic is pulling his strings and making sure forensics is done this way, to ensure that all I's are dotted and all T's are crossed. Can they sever themselves from the emotional connection and the emotional loss? Yeah. And the author did this, I think, in such a beautiful way that it never felt depressing, right? It never felt like the plot never felt weighed down by the grief, and it didn't undermine the grief. Yeah. And
which is not easy to do, because this is, I mean, if you think about the scenario, right, of like what's actually happening in the story, that can get real dark real quick.
Exactly. It can, and you would totally understand, because we started at a funeral. Yeah.
We couldn't even fault her, because we're like, I mean, listen, she let me know. She did not lie to me.
Life or death, and then, death at a funeral. It's like you wouldn't fault it. But I think she did a great job of writing that line and made so that the story moves forward. And so what we begin to see is that those external events begin to drive that internal transformation, and even their internal transformation towards each other. That it takes those external circumstances to sort of level the playing field, if you will, for Dominic and Ava, that they both have skin in the game. And I really love that, especially because part of Ava's setup was the treatment of women in these environments, in the FBI. And sort of like it took something early on for Dominic to be like, oh, because he wouldn't have otherwise noticed it. Yeah. And it didn't affect him the same way that it affected her. But at the same time, it's going to rub her the wrong way. Like, I shouldn't have to need you to be able to get these things done. So the point of this, me saying that, I think having those external things helped them to address the things that were very obvious and also the things that were not so obvious. And that they really had to overcome for the romance side for there to be true intimacy. Yeah. Right? To sort of level that playing field, even if we cannot make it go away on the FBI side, it should be in here between us.
Yeah, yeah.
And she did a great job of that.
Yeah, and that's like one of the things that you're always looking for, right? In I think when you're doing, particularly like when you're mixing like genre, so if you're doing like a romantic suspense or you're doing a mystery romance or that kind of thing, where you have, kind of feels like you have your work cut out for you in a big way, because you have to give the mystery, or you have to give the suspense, those external actions. Now this is going to be true for everything. It just means that you might have more conventions that you're having to deal with, right? So if you're doing a mystery, you've got to get your clues, you've got to have a reveal and all of that. But you need to craft those external events so that they're challenging the internal that internal transformation of your protagonists, and that internal transformation needs to participate or enable your lovers to get together. So they all have to play their role so that one doesn't feel tangential. And she does such a nice job of forcing them by unifying. And this is a note that I made for characters, and we'll talk about more next week. But she did a really great job of the way that she established a lot of the characters and the wounds that they're dealing with. She unified that through the lens of grief, where they're all dealing with some form of grief and finding out, how do you move on and how do you deal with that pain? And so it created this kind of cohesive lens that the story is looking through the different ways that, you have Dominic handling grief one way and Ava handling grief another way. And they challenge one another, right? There are moments when Dominic is like, wow, like I was crying in my room, and Ava was going out and getting the thing done, like she was going out and like taking back her agency, or that kind of, and so using that so that they're also challenging each other to be better, because Dominic is, he's literally a trained hostage negotiator. So he knows how to handle a situation and how to navigate a situation with intention. But he's unaware of some of the of what Ava is stacked up against as a woman in the FBI. And she calls him on it, right? And it forces him to reconsider, because he asks her again, very beginning of the story, he's like, oh, were you in Van? And she's like, seriously? All these people loved Van. Have you asked any of them if they were involved?
If they were sleeping. Yeah.
And he was like, and Dominic is like, whoops. He's like, oh, she right. Oh, I did. Oop. And then, he's got to like reevaluate the way that he perceives events. And so you're watching them mutually challenge each other, and it's all participating in that growth and their ability to, again, like come together in true intimacy, just like you said.
Mm-hmm. And there were so many times where you saw, as the story progressed, where he could see like this aroma of offense, you know what I mean? And he was like, listen, I know you're very competent. Listen.
I love so much. Every time you watch Dominic in a normal conversation pull out his hostage negotiator skills, and he goes, this must be very frustrating for you. And occasionally, either another negotiator or Ava being like, man, you take that somewhere else. Get out of, I know what you're trying to negotiate me. Now get out of here. Stop it.
Absolutely. I will say, and we sort of went into the sort of emotional core. We talked about that, like the personal grief. There are also sort of the wounds of their past, both of them, when it came to her past with her father and her relationship with her family, and y'all, I'm being very vague intentionally, and his past with his mother and his father, and sort of like where both of them have to also go on this journey of having some sort of reconciliation with that pain and those moments in order to truly show up in this capacity if they wanted this person and to be with this person. And that's just a very like common present telltale sign of a romance. And here it works so beautifully because those moments actually lend themselves to this mystery.
Yeah.
And then the aspects that causes this to be both suspense and thriller. And so we start seeing where those parts where when done wrong seem so like there's space between them, like they are, like you are forcing them and that they are just items on the page. Here it becomes like a melting pot where you cannot separate one from the other. And I think that's what makes this such a really great romantic suspense, that those elements are together. You cannot have one without the other. You would not have had the transformation or the growth in the relationship without the other things, which I think this will be a great time for you to sort of maybe kind of talk about a little bit about the FBI aspects of it, because I think it actually lent itself, and I think you believe it was just thrown in. So
Yeah, so I do think, because one of the things that I think made this a great differentiator that she did with this particular story, and this is true for, I think, all of her series are in the FBI, but she did lean into the FBI procedural, right? So the way that the FBI works, she leans on the FBI hierarchy to drive conflict. Again, it generates conflict between Ava and Dominic, and it complicates Ava's ability to investigate the case. But I think so. So one of the things that felt a little like, yeah, wasn't my favorite is particularly when we get to midpoint. So without spoiling too much, I can at least say like they wind up in a hostage negotiating scenario. And this is where, and so what happens is they're not like it has nothing to do with the investigation at hand. It's not related to it reveals some backstory, and so like there are reveals that are sort of like tied into the story as a whole, but we kind of got this promise of investigating a mystery. And so normally what I would want to see is action that's all going to tie back into that same plot thread, and that's what made this one feel a little bit tangential, because what happened, and I think this is the way she also kind of pulled it back around, she actually brings in another POV character to keep moving the investigation forward. So that's where it feels a little bit like it starts to kind of like ping pong off a little bit. Like there's like a little bit of like a ricochet effect, and we're sort of like, now we're looking over here and we're looking over here, because we move out of the established POV characters that we've been walking with through the story. But she does use it so that she's establishing some stakes that'll pay off later in the story, and we are getting that investigative information while Ava and Dominic are navigating a hostage situation. So, so what I would have wanted to create a more cohesive whole is for the at least if they're going to be pulled into a hostage negotiation situation, that it was going to tie back into the case and reveal something about the case. But instead, we leaned into a different POV to bring that information in while they're dealing with this other thing. And then this is where they have their first intimate connection. Again, we're a little bit past midpoint, or like as in we're a little bit past like this, the 50% mark when this all happens. And I just think because we're invested, like the promise we get is that we're investigating Van's death and these FBI deaths, this major thing happening at midpoint feels kind of disconnected from the initial like external thrust of the promise that we're getting. But I think that she pulls it, like she uses it to her advantage and pulls it back in by bringing in our POV character that's going to pay off a little bit later. And it is leaning into some of this FBI like procedural, even though it's procedural not related to the thing we were investigating before. So it's not fully out of left field, but I would have wanted to see something probably a bit more integrated personally.
I totally understand that. I feel like this is something that you can sometimes see in romances, is that it's almost like you have to have a scenario where neither one of them has the upper hand, but you can actually see him. This is when we see him being dominant and why they defer to him, so that it isn't it's not hanging on his political or personal ties, but that he really is who he says he is. The other part about that I felt like it was beneficial is that they needed to both be outside of their comfort zone to get those walls to go down enough, to get the forced proximity, to get the one bid scenario, to get the romance aspect, and to get the intimacy, right? Because they both are stretched on multiple levels. They're stretched on the physical because they're tired, they are stressed. It's a high stakes negotiation. And I felt like this is one of those, I kind of put on here in my notes, like it was also kind of like, I think a little bit like a marketing thing, right? In that I think when it comes to the FBI procedural thing, I think you are almost, as a writer, potentially leaning into kind of make your net wider, so that you sort of lean into like that traditional aspect. You know, people that like a police procedure, you're kind of trying to give it its own thing because it's FBI procedure. And it may have been a little bit of a stretch, but I think we needed the newness of location, and we needed them to have a sense of intimacy before they're thrust in the next part. The final aspect of that particular time was like, this book clocks pretty consistently with traditional romance. You know, back in the day, I feel old, but back in the day, you know, you usually did not have the first full physical intimate scene until the halfway point.
Nice.
And this does clock with that. And because of the things that we've talked about before, it makes sense.
Yeah, it works really well to drag it that long because there's a lot of stakes to physical intimacy because of the setup of the story.
Exactly. And I wouldn't even say drag. It's just like, it's just happening because of, you know, the way things that are happening, physical injuries, the things that they've encountered thus far, and the fact that they had to get to a place to trust each other, but at the same time, that trust is fragile. Right? It is really fragile still. And then for them to be sort of away from the environment to get a sort of sense of understanding what's going on because it is still moving. The last thing that I will say is I think it was a little bit of a fumble with the introduction of that POV then, but then I feel like it was necessary because of the ending.
Yeah, and that's why I felt like in the end she made it work for her, even though like I would have at least like said like, you know, at least getting the like an insight about the case in that midpoint event, like something that's like, you know, have something related to the case we're investigating as being relevant or emerging from that hostage situation. So you get all of the same things, but you keep it cohesive. But again, because it was sort of like we get this other POV, and I'm like, who are you? Excuse me, ma'am. Like I was watching Ava and Dominic. Who are you? Who are you? But she used that to set us up for so I think that's why it was sort of like, did it work 100% for me? No. But I see the way that she leveraged every choice she made to bring it back around in the end. And that's where that is sort of like, you forgive a lot because you do see that she paid off everything that she set up in the end.
Exactly. And so I think what we're talking about now is like, you go through this process, and I think all of this along with what happens after that moment, is that we get to the end of the story and you really feel like everything is earned.
Yeah.
When it comes to their happily ever after, to the case being solved. And I think, I mean, listen, I realize like this is really not my jam. It was good, but it's not my jam.
Yeah.
But what I will say is this: I think sometimes in other stories, if you're not someone who reads that a lot, it can seem like, okay, it's just action or another body for the sake of another body. Mm-hmm. But here, I think what happens is that every element feels earned at the end. And so, like you said, those setups and those setups are paid off at the end, and I think you really do have this. You have a romance that is a true romance that is in the center of all of this, and that allows them to come out on the other side being better versions of themselves because of it, and while at the same time not shrinking on the mystery or the twists, because these twists, she kept them coming.
Yeah.
And also a very satisfying end to the murder mystery.
Yeah, I was going to say, importantly, we get, so even where I had some of my, we'll say, minor disagreements over certain plot choices, we still got, we got a fair play reveal at the end, and we had hero at the mercy of the villain, and even early in the all throughout the story, she's seeding the breakup, right? And so we're watching play out all of the reasons why they would conceivably break up if they don't deal with this stuff, and they do have their breakup because of these things. So so it doesn't feel out of left field for them to break up. It's this moment of exasperation, right, between the two of them, and there's a little bit of misunderstanding at work, and so everything is brought to its to a conclusion, right, so that it all rounds out nicely. We set up a thread and we've paid it off by the end. So our thriller gets paid off, our mystery gets paid off, our romance gets paid off. So all of those threads kind of close out together and come together in the end.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, for a final thing for me, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to the plot, this is one of those stories that you would want to look at, because every one of the major moments, there is the duality that is present. And that's what you want more than anything. You don't want to be able to separate them. And I think that's where you get the difference between whether something is a main plot or a subplot versus it being a dual. They both are important to every key aspect of the story. And they're equally important to the both of them, especially, when you think of Ava and her job and just paying homage to someone who meant a lot to her, and just so happens she finds love, right, in one of his other mentees. And so I think overall that's what makes this story a great pick for us on the podcast, as well as a great pick for romantic suspense. I will say my final thought on this as we land this baby is that I think this also is a really great pick to look at a distinction between having a romantic suspense right now that is connected to organized crime. That is a common thing right now because it is very popular when it comes to romantic suspense. And for authors that still want to have the sort of life or death stakes while having a steamy on-page romance, including the intimacy scenes, because there are full intimacy scenes on page, to having that, this is a great example of it. And I think I would really love to find something that's even parallel without having the sort of the fact that they're FBI agents, right? Having some sort of other, I don't know, but I think for what it is, it's helpful. I also think that I could see, again, I think there are some editorial writing choices that were made that probably, if they wouldn't have done it, would have made it probably a little more popular on the romantic suspense side and probably given it a little more traction, because I think sprinkling in some of the procedural stuff made it feel almost a little too much like a mainstream suspense and not a romantic suspense, because Ain't nobody caring about no FBI procedure, but whatever. I mean, it's part of the story, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, what's interesting, and this is where it gets like um where it gets tricky, I think, because and maybe this is a matter of like unclarity of exactly the genre niching that you want, because there's an aspect where like if this is going to be a mystery romance, right, where you have a strong mystery and a romance firing, like you do need those elements of like the procedural elements. But I think that if you're wanting to do like a perfect 50-50, then it has to like maybe push together more like the lovers more and have more of that romantic tension earlier in the story to really like so that you're getting both 100% and not kind of having this like 70-30, 60-40, you know, kind of mix. You know what I mean? Because you do like if we're looking at a mystery romance, you do want that stuff, but if it's a mystery romance, like then you gotta like have enough romances, what right? And that's really where you're having to wrestle with the interplay of those things, which can get really tricky. And as far as I can tell, I think mystery romance as a genre is a bit less popular than
It
romantic
is.
suspense, dark romance. Like it's basically like of all the romances, I think it's probably right near the bottom in terms of popularity and the just the sheer volume of people who are writing it, reading it, wanting it, you know. So that's just a thing to know as well if you're writing mystery romance, you know. Um,
But that's why I wouldn't have classified it as a mystery romance. I don't think it's enough to do that. And I think what it can happen is like you muddy your audience instead of you leaning into where you're already strong so that you can actually tap into the bigger of the audiences
yeah.
while at the same time giving them exposure to the other. So what happens here is that it's almost can feel like a missed opportunity, and it can make those other areas feel like wonk 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 wonk, right? Because what we would have wanted more was more time with the two of them on the page getting to know each other. But those would be choices, and it could also be a brand choice in that she wants people to know they're going to get a little bit of both. And
Yeah.
like I said earlier with our boot camp, like do you boo, but at the same time you may limit your audience because of it, which means you don't get as much exposure to be able to build your fan base around this series, that these are the components that I'm promising you that will be a part of this experience, because it's almost like you cut it off a little too soon.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think now I don't know because I haven't read through the whole. I've read part of the second one, but I think that future books maybe lean more into romantic suspense, right? So this was
Because you
like this
need
was the
to.
first one, yeah, and so I think that she like is one of those things where probably just like learned from the first book, right, and was like, oh, okay, like, and then you know building out that the brand and her knowledge of like what she's who she's trying to attract and what she's trying to achieve with those later books and going more romantic suspense than having that sort of like mystery element. So I think that kind of that's one of those things that builds over time throughout the series as she wrote more books, as far as I can tell anyway.
And it may be because of the things that we're seeing too, right? And,
Yeah.
I mean, and I didn't look at the other ones. Is it the same? Is it still Ava and Dominic?
No, it's different
Go to
couples
another
every
couple.
time.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
they're
that
all
makes it. Yeah,
FBI
that's
but
good.
different couples.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Okay. So was there any other elements that you wanted to point out? I think we have covered, well, just about everything on my notes.
I think that kind of that rounds us out for the day, huh?
Yep. Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us for our discussion of the plot of Cold and Deadly by Toni Anderson. Next week, we're going to be deep diving into our cast of characters, talking about our main male character, our female character, and getting a little discussion on antagonists as well. So look forward to that. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, thumbs this video up, etc., all the good buttons. And we will see you back here next week. And until then, happy writing.